The Hargrove estate did not merely host parties, it performed them. Every chandelier in the grand ballroom had been imported from a glass foundry in Vienna, 200 pounds of hand-blown crystals suspended above the heads of 300 guests, who had each paid, in one form or another, a price beyond what most people earned in a lifetime simply to stand beneath them. The light they threw was not warm. It was precise, a cold, architectural radiance that flattered no one and illuminated everything, which was, of course, entirely the point. Victoria Hargrove did not build her world to be flattering. She built it to be undeniable. She stood near the East Terrace doors now, a glass of Sancerre in her right hand that she had not touched since it was placed there 40 minutes ago. Her dress was the color of deep winter slate, structured at the shoulders, fluid at the hem, the kind of garment that announced money without ever speaking its name. Her dark hair was swept back from her face with the architectural precision of everything else in her life, not a strand out of place. She was 39 years old, and she looked it, and she did not care, because she had stopped spending energy on caring about such things sometime around her 34th birthday, when she had closed her second acquisition and realized that the opinion of anyone who would judge her face over her balance sheet was an opinion she could comfortably discard. She was listening to Franklin Mercer talk about his logistics portfolio, and she was doing it with the focused, unblinking attention that had made her the most feared negotiator on the eastern seaboard. And she was not thinking about Franklin Mercer at all. She was thinking about Lily. Lily was across the ballroom, stationed near the dessert table with the quiet dignity of a child who had attended enough of these events to understand the rules without enjoying them. She was 9 years old, and she had her mother's cheekbones and her father's eyes, or what Victoria remembered of her father's eyes, which was less and less with each passing year, which was a fact she did not examine closely. Lily's dress was ivory with a navy sash, her blonde hair pulled into a braid that had taken their housekeeper, Margaret, 45 minutes to complete. She looked, as she always did at these events, like a photograph of a child rather than a child herself. But Victoria noticed even from across the room, even while appearing to listen to Franklin Mercer discuss last quarter's freight tonnage, that Lily was not eating the desserts. She was standing beside them with her hands clasped in front of her, watching the room the way she always did, quietly, carefully, with those wide gray eyes that seemed to be filing everything away. She had a sensitive stomach. That was how Victoria had always categorized it. A sensitive stomach, prone to flares, requiring a careful diet and occasional medication. The pediatric allergist at Children's National had used other language, had spoken about mast cell reactivity and histamine thresholds, and the importance of carrying an epinephrine autoinjector at all times, but Victoria had found a way to organize that information into something more manageable. Sensitive stomach, dietary restrictions, nothing to arrange one's life around. The epinephrine autoinjector was in Lily's emergency kit, which was in the hands of Dr. Philip Stratton, Victoria's personal physician, who was somewhere in this room. She had seen him earlier near the bar. He was competent. Everything was arranged. Across the ballroom, Lily's eyes found her mother's for a moment. Victoria gave the small, precise nod. That was their signal. "I see you, I'm here, everything is fine." And Lily nodded back and went on watching the room. Near the main entrance, stationed between the coat check alcove and the secondary corridor that led to the kitchen and service areas, a man stood with his back to the marble pillar, and his eyes moving across the room in a slow, methodical sweep. His name was Daniel Croft, and he was not supposed to be here. That was not technically accurate. He had been hired, through Mercer Security Group's Overflow Staffing Division, to work this event as a supplementary guard, one of 8 additional bodies brought in to manage the crowd of 300. He was supposed to be here. He simply was not supposed to matter here, which was a different thing entirely, and one that everyone in the room understood without being told. He was 36 years old, 6 feet even, with the broad-shouldered, quietly solid build of a man who had once needed that body for something specific and now simply maintained it out of habit. His tuxedo was rented, and it fit imperfectly across the shoulders, which he was aware of. His shoes were his own polished black Oxfords that had been resoled twice. He had dark brown hair that needed cutting, and a face that was pleasant in a forgettable way, which was generally an asset in his current line of work, though it had not always been the case. He was thinking about his daughter, Cora, who was 7 years old and currently at home in their apartment in Tacoma Park, with his neighbor Mrs. Patricia Bellows, who charged $12 an hour and made excellent macaroni and cheese, and had once told Cora that her father was a good man, which Cora had reported to Daniel with the careful seriousness of a child delivering important intelligence. He was thinking about Cora because he thought about Cora constantly. The way certain sounds never fully leave the ear, a background frequency that shaped everything else without demanding attention, and he was thinking about her specifically because, across the grand ballroom of the Hargrove estate, a 9-year-old girl in an ivory dress was standing beside a dessert table, looking at her mother with an expression Daniel recognized immediately, having seen its precise twin on his own daughter's face more times than he could count. It was the expression of a child who wanted to cross a room but had already calculated the cost of doing so and decided against it. He noted it. He moved his eyes on. He kept watching the room. The party was reaching its most precarious hour, that window between 9 and 10 in the evening, when the alcohol had been flowing long enough to loosen inhibitions without yet tipping into disorder, when the conversation grew louder and the laughter sharper, and the whole event began to feel like a living thing with its own momentum, no longer controlled by any single person's will. Victoria Hargrove stood at the center of it and felt, as she always did at this stage of the evening, the faint vertigo of a woman who has built something too large to fully hold. The deal with Meridian Capital was not going well. Franklin Mercer had given her the news in that careful, almost apologetic way that men used when delivering bad news to women they respected, but still assumed would need managing. She had thanked him for his candor and excused herself, and found a quiet corner near the library doors where she could stand with her Sancerre and recalibrate. The acquisition had been 18 months in development, $300 million in committed capital. If Meridian pulled their portion, the whole structure needed to be rethought within 60 days. She pressed 2 fingers against her temple and breathed through her nose and reminded herself, as she had reminded herself approximately 4,000 times in the past decade, that she had been here before. Not here exactly, but in the proximity of collapse, close enough to feel the heat of it. She had always found a way through. Across the room, she watched Lily drift toward the long buffet table that ran along the north wall, not the dessert table, the full dinner spread, still laden with the remains of the evening's catering. The caterers tonight were the Beaumont Group, who had been handling Hargrove events for 6 years and knew Lily's dietary restrictions by heart. Victoria had spoken with them directly, as she always did, and confirmed that everything on the buffet would be safe. What Victoria did not know, because no one had told her, because the chain of communication had failed at its most mundane possible link, was that the Beaumont Group's regular sous chef, a meticulous woman named Sandra, who had memorized every Hargrove dietary restriction over 4 years of working these events, had called in sick that afternoon with a fever. Her replacement was a young man named Marcus, who had been briefed in 20 minutes, and who had assumed, reasonably but incorrectly, that the small ramekins of spiced walnut brittle placed at intervals along the buffet table were listed on the approved menu, rather than being a last-minute addition from the decorating team who thought they were just garnish. They were not just garnish. They contained tree nuts in concentrations sufficient to trigger a reaction in a child with Lily Hargrove's documented sensitivity to cashews and pistachios. Lily stood at the buffet table and looked at the small ramekin of brittle near the shrimp display. It smelled warm and sweet and faintly spiced. She was hungry because dinner had been late and she had only eaten half of what Margaret had packed for her in the car. She thought about asking someone if it was okay. She looked around for Dr. Stratton and didn't see him. She looked across the room for her mother, who was facing away, speaking to someone near the library doors. Lily was 9 years old and conscientious, and usually very good about this. Usually, she took a small piece of the brittle. It was barely a bite. 40 feet away, Daniel Croft watched her do it. He had been watching the buffet line with the same methodical attention he gave everything in the room, because in his experience, which was specific and hard-won, the dangerous moments were never where people expected them. He did not know what Lily had just eaten. He did not know her allergy history or her medical records, but he noticed the way her hand moved to the ramekin, and he noticed, in the same cataloging sweep, the small silver medical alert bracelet on her right wrist that caught the light of the chandeliers for just a moment as she reached forward. He noted it. He kept watching. 18 minutes later, everything changed. It began with a sound, not a dramatic sound, not a scream or a crash, just a cough. A dry, tight cough from across the room that would not have been audible over the noise of 300 people if Daniel had not already been tracking the girl with the medical bracelet with the quiet, involuntary vigilance of a man whose instincts had never fully switched off. He turned toward the sound. Lily Hargrove was standing near the edge of the buffet table, one hand pressed flat against her sternum, her face flushed in a way that had nothing to do with warmth. She coughed again. A third time. Each cough was tighter than the last, the sound of airways working against themselves. Daniel was already moving. He was 20 feet away when she started to scratch at her neck. And he could see from that distance, the hives rising along her collarbone raised. Red, appearing with the terrible speed of the body declaring an emergency. He was 10 feet away when she turned in a small, frightened circle, looking for something or someone. And the movement was wrong, uncoordinated, slightly delayed, the look of a child whose blood pressure was beginning to drop. He was 5 feet away when she made a sound that was not quite a breath and not quite a word. A small, desperate intake that didn't bring enough air with it. The woman next to Lily at the buffet table noticed first a guest in a red gown, whose face went rigid with alarm. She said, loudly, "Is she, oh God? Is she okay?" And those 4 words detonated through the room like a charge. The way alarm always does in contained spaces, instant and total. The ballroom did not descend into chaos immediately. There was a half-second of collective processing, the way a crowd registers unexpected information, a suspended moment in which 300 people tried to determine whether what they were seeing was real. Then someone near the center tables stood up. Then someone else made a sound of alarm. Then the ripple became a wave, and the wave became noise, and the room fractured into urgent, panicked motion. Victoria Hargrove heard the word Lily from somewhere to her left, and she stopped existing as a businesswoman, as an executive, as a negotiator of 9-figure deals, and became nothing more than a mother moving through a crowd toward her child. She got through the ring of alarmed guests in time to see Lily trying to stay upright, one hand on the buffet table's edge. Her face, now the ashen, mottled color that no child's face should ever be. Victoria's voice when she said her daughter's name did not sound like her own voice. It sounded like something breaking. "Philip!" She turned, searching wildly. "Where is Philip Dr. Stratton?" Dr. Philip Stratton was a good physician. He had been Victoria Hargrove's personal doctor for 4 years, and he was competent in the broad, general practice sense of the word. He arrived at Lily's side 30 seconds after Victoria. His face already tight, with the specific dread of a doctor who has just identified a situation outside his comfort zone. "Okay," he said, kneeling beside the girl. "Okay. Let me look at her. Lily, can you tell me?" He pressed 2 fingers to her wrist, then her neck. Her pulse was fast and thin. Her lips had a grayish cast at the edges. It could be a panic response, or a vasovagal, the heat, the crowds. "She can't breathe," Victoria said, and her voice was flat and precise and terrifying, because it was the voice of a woman refusing to lose control when control was the only thing she had left. "She's breathing. She's Philip." Victoria gripped his arm. Her neck. Look at her neck. The hives were spreading, moving from the collarbone up to the jaw, red and raised and advancing. Dr. Stratton's face changed. "We need to lay her down. Someone call emergency services. I need her bag. Where is her emergency kit?" But Lily's emergency kit had been in his care, and in the chaos of his movement across the room it had been set down on a chair somewhere. And no one knew which chair, and now the room was too loud and too crowded, and someone near the edge was saying, "Give her water, give her some water," and someone else was saying, "She needs air, opened the doors, and someone was calling emergency services on their phone, who confirmed they were 11 minutes away, and 11 minutes was a sentence in a room that was right now watching a 9-year-old girl slowly losing the battle with her own immune system. "Someone help her," Victoria Hargrove said. And it was the most honest thing she had said in years. Not a command, not a demand, a plea. Raw and unguarded, and directed at no one and everyone in the room. "Please, someone help my daughter." For 2 minutes, 120 seconds that felt structural, load-bearing, like time itself had changed its properties, the room performed urgency without producing results. A man near the front tables had medical experience from a college course and moved forward with confidence that evaporated the moment he was close enough to assess the situation. He stepped back. Another guest, a woman who identified herself as a nurse, also pushed through. She was a nurse practitioner who worked in dermatology, and she looked at Lily's rapidly degrading condition and felt the specific inadequacy of someone with medical training facing a medical emergency far outside her specialty. Water was presented 3 times by 3 different people. Each time, it was gently turned away by someone who had the sense to recognize that water was not going to solve this, without anyone present having a clear sense of what would. Dr. Stratton was kneeling beside Lily now, his phone in his hand, speaking to a poison control consultant, while simultaneously trying to perform a clinical assessment in a crowd that kept surging and retreating around him. His hands, Victoria noted, were not steady. They had been steady in every previous interaction she'd had with him. In every physical exam, every consultation. They were not steady now. Lily's eyes were open. That was the thing Victoria would carry for the rest of her life. The specific image of her daughter's gray eyes, open and tracking, present still there but frightened in a way that went beyond words. The animal terror of a body that cannot breathe. She had both hands pressed to her own chest, not gripping, just pressing, as if she could manually hold herself together. Victoria was on her knees on the marble floor, holding her daughter's face in her hands, and the marble was cold, and her dress was being ruined, and she could not have cared less about anything in her life. "We need epinephrine," she said. To no one. To everyone. "Her kit." "Someone find?" "I'm looking for it," said one of the other security guards, a tall man named Brett, who was moving chairs and overturning clutch bags with increasing desperation. "The ambulance." 9 minutes, someone said. And then, updated. "They've hit traffic on the bridge." 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Victoria looked at her daughter's face. She calculated 12 minutes. She did not have anywhere useful to put that calculation. It was in this moment, with the room at its most precisely useless, that she became aware of a presence at the edge of the circle, not pushing through, not announcing itself, but there. Solid, still. Daniel Croft did not push through the crowd. He did not announce himself or demand passage, or use the authority of his rented tuxedo and his official lanyard to clear a path. He simply moved through the gaps that fear and distraction left in people's attention. The way water finds its route, not by force but by geometry. He was inside the ring of guests before anyone had quite decided to let him through. He knelt beside Lily, at a distance of approximately 2 feet, close enough to assess, far enough not to crowd, and he looked at her with the particular, unhurried attention of someone running a protocol, rather than reacting to a situation. He took in her color, her posture, the distribution of the hives, the sound of her breathing thin, stertorous, the chest working too hard for too little result. He glanced at her wrist. Medical alert bracelet. He noted the logo. He looked up at Victoria Hargrove, who was kneeling across from him with her daughter's face in her hands, and their eyes met over the child between them. "Excuse me." This was from one of the lead security staff, a heavy-set man named Garrett, who had appeared at Daniel's shoulder. "You need to step back, man. Give the doctor space." "The doctor needs epinephrine," Daniel said, without looking at Garrett. "Does he have it?" A beat. "Her kit. Where is it?" "We're looking. I need someone to check the coat room, the secondary lounge, and every chair along the north wall." He said it calmly. with the specific precision of a man providing coordinates. Look for a small black zippered case, about 6 inches. It should have a red cross on it. He said it to Garrett, who after a half-second of resistance simply nodded and began relaying the description. Daniel returned his attention to Lily. "Hey." He kept his voice low and even. The same voice, Victoria would later think, that you might use to talk someone back from a ledge. Not forced calm, not performed calm, but genuine. The product of a man who had learned to locate steadiness, not as an emotional state, but as a professional discipline. "I know you're scared. That's okay. Breathe out first. Don't try to breathe in, just breathe out." Lily looked at him. Her eyes found his and stayed there. The way drowning people find fixed points. "Breathe out," he said again. "Good." Dr. Stratton looked at him. "I'm her physician. I have this." "What's your differential?" Daniel said. She's presenting with a possible vasovagal. She has a tree nut allergy." He said it without inflection, as fact. "This is anaphylaxis. She needs epinephrine, 15 to 30 milligrams of Benadryl, and she needs to be supine with her legs elevated 30 degrees. Not water, not open air. Epinephrine." The word landed differently than the physician's uncertain assessments had. It had the quality of something definitive. Victoria stared at him. "How do you know that?" "Her bracelet." He nodded toward Lily's wrist. "Myelin EpiPen alert. Tree nut sensitivity. And there are walnut shells on her lower lip. You can see them if you look closely. Small fragment. She ate something from the buffet." He was looking at Victoria now with a steadiness that she would later describe in the privacy of her own thoughts, in the weeks that followed, when she had time to process the architecture of that night, as the most calming thing she had ever seen on a human face. Not reassurance, not optimism, just presence. The radical, grounding fact of a person who knew what to do and was doing it. Someone found it. From across the room, near the north corridor, Brett's voice, cracking with relief. "I've got the kit." The case was passed through the crowd hand to hand, which would later strike Victoria as the most unexpectedly cooperative thing she had witnessed in a decade, of watching powerful people navigate rooms, all those hands, passing it forward without hesitation, without negotiating who got credit, just moving the object to the place where it needed to be. Daniel caught it. Unzipped it in one motion. Inside, 2 EpiPen auto-injectors, a blister pack of diphenhydramine, a small card with Lily's allergy protocol in Dr. Stratton's handwriting. He looked at Stratton. "Do you want to do this?" It was not a challenge. It was a genuine question, offered without hierarchy, and it was this specific courtesy, this deliberate passing of authority back to the physician that would later make Victoria understand something about the kind of person she was dealing with. Dr. Stratton took the EpiPen. His hands had steadied. "Outer thigh," Daniel said. "Right through the fabric is fine." He was already repositioning Lily, one hand behind her shoulders, one beneath her knees, guiding her to the floor so that she was supine, her legs slightly elevated by a folded dinner jacket that Daniel had pulled from the nearest bystander without asking. Stratton administered the injection. The room had gone nearly silent. 300 people, and the only sounds were Lily's effortful breathing and the distant echo of a dropped glass somewhere in the service corridor. 10 seconds. Victoria was holding Lily's hand. She had stopped speaking because there were no words left that were adequate to the moment, and she had always respected adequacy enough not to speak without it. Daniel watched Lily's chest. He counted. 20 seconds. Lily's breathing had not improved. He had expected this epinephrine worked quickly, but not instantaneously. And the reaction had progressed far enough. 30 seconds. A sound. Small. Barely a sound at all, just a fractionally deeper intake of breath. Then, another. Daniel did not allow himself to react to this. Not yet. He kept watching. 45 seconds. Lily Hargrove coughed. A real cough, productive, clearing not the strangled tightness from before, but the cough of airways beginning to open. She coughed again. Her chest rose. Fell. Rose again. and this time there was real air in it, and her color began, by the slowest degrees, to shift. 60 seconds, Victoria saw her daughter's eyes change. The terror was still there, but beneath it, something else was emerging. Recognition. Presence. Lily was coming back into the room, assembling herself from the scattered pieces of the last several minutes. "Mom," she said. The word was barely a whisper. Hoarse, small, uncertain, Victoria said her name, and then she was not capable of any other words, and she pulled her daughter's head against her chest and held her, and the sound she made was not a sound anyone in that room had ever heard from Victoria Hargrove before, and no one who heard it would ever forget it. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds, that silence, that absolute, cathedral quiet of 300 people holding their breath together. Then the room exhaled, not in noise, not in applause or celebration, but in the specific, audible relief of held tension releasing all at once. A sound like pressure equalizing. People sat down. A woman near the center tables began to cry quietly. A man near the bar pressed both hands to his face. Somewhere in the service corridor, a tray was set down with exaggerated care, as if sudden noise might undo what had just been corrected. Brett, the security guard who had found the kit, stood in the middle of the room with the empty case in his hands, looking at nothing. Dr. Stratton sat back on his heels and breathed. His hands, when he set them on his knees, were trembling. Daniel Croft knelt beside the girl and her mother, and did not move, because Lily was still stabilizing, and he was still monitoring the cadence of her breathing. The color returning slowly, unevenly, but returning to her face. He would continue monitoring until she was in an ambulance with a paramedic taking over, because that was the protocol he had built his professional life around, the discipline of not releasing a patient from your attention until there is something more qualified to take her. Lily looked up from her mother's arms and found his face. Her eyes were clearer now. Exhausted, the post-reaction collapse was beginning. The body's debt coming due after the adrenaline, but present. "Hi," she said. He almost smiled. "Hi, did you fix me?" He did smile then, briefly, carefully. "Your body fixed itself. I just held some space." She considered this with the seriousness of a 9-year-old processing a philosophical concept. "Okay," she said, and closed her eyes. The ambulance arrived 14 minutes after the call delayed by bridge traffic, as predicted, and by the time the paramedics entered the ballroom, Lily was conscious, responsive, and beginning to show the particular irritability of a child who had been frightened and was now processing that fright as mild indignation at having been frightened. The paramedics assessed her, confirmed the administration of epinephrine, and recommended transport for observation. Victoria agreed without discussion. As the paramedics prepared the gurney, Victoria Hargrove stood up from the floor of her own ballroom, in her ruined slate-gray dress, with her hair finally and irreparably out of its arrangement, and she looked around the room at 300 people she had assembled to impress. And she did not care even slightly what any of them thought. She turned to Daniel Croft. He was already standing a polite distance away, his hands at his sides. His face returned to the neutral watchfulness she had first registered without noticing. "You," she said. He waited. "Who are you?" They sat in the small family parlor off the main entrance, just the two of them, and Garrett standing outside the closed door at Victoria's request, because she wanted no witnesses to whatever this conversation was going to be. The paramedics had taken Lily to Georgetown University Hospital, with 2 of Victoria's own security staff accompanying the ambulance. Victoria's assistant, a sharp-eyed young woman named Rebecca, who had appeared from nowhere in the way that excellent assistants always do in crises, had taken over the logistical collapse of the party. Graceful dismissals, refunds initiated, apologies delivered. The ballroom was emptying. Victoria had changed into the plain dark slacks and cashmere sweater she kept in the estate's upstairs guest suite for precisely the kind of emergency that required her to stop performing. She had a cup of tea that she wasn't drinking. Daniel had declined everything and was sitting in a chair across from her with his elbows on his knees, the rented jacket folded over the arm, looking, for the first time that night, like someone who was tired. "Tell me how you knew," she said. He looked at her steadily. "The bracelet, the shells, The symptom progression. You knew what anaphylaxis looks like. Yes, you knew the protocol, the positioning, the correct medication. You knew to use the EpiPen through the fabric. Yes, you knew to hand it to Stratton instead of doing it yourself, because you weren't legally authorized, and he was. Something shifted in his face, a very small change, barely visible, the way a light changes behind curtains rather than the curtains themselves moving. Yes, that is not security guard training, Victoria said. No. The silence between them was the kind that asks a specific question. He breathed once, slowly. I was a paramedic. Before, he looked at his hands. Flight paramedic. Eventually. 7 years. Mostly trauma, cardiac events, anaphylaxis cases. I was based out of MedStar. Ran the pediatric anaphylaxis protocol training for the metro region for 2 years. Victoria said nothing. I left the job 3 years ago. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of evasion, the quiet of someone selecting which truth to offer from a set of truths that are all equally real, and not all equally bearable. My daughter got sick, he said. Cora. She's 7 now. 3 years ago she was diagnosed with a kidney condition. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but requiring close management, frequent appointments, a careful routine. My ex-wife had moved to Portland, which was a whole separate situation. Cora was with me, which is where she needed to be. But the flight paramedic schedule, 24-hour shifts, irregular rotations, the physical and emotional weight of it. I couldn't be what she needed and do that job at the same level it required. He paused. And it required everything. That's the kind of job it is. Victoria looked at him. So you became a security guard. It pays enough. The hours are predictable. I can be home when she wakes up. I can be at her appointments. He said it without apology or self-pity, as simple fact. It's a different life than I planned. But Cora is stable. She's thriving, and I'm there. That's the architecture I chose. Victoria set her tea down. She had the expression of a woman examining something she had been looking at for years and only just seeing clearly. Cora, she said. That's a beautiful name. She chose it, essentially. It was one of the names on our list, and she figured out early that when we said it differently than the others. He almost smiled. 7 years old and already negotiating. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. She was thinking, though, she would not have framed it this way about the geometry of choices, about the decisions that look like losses from the outside and from some angles are losses, genuinely, irrevocably. But from other angles are the structure by which a person decides what they are. She thought about a particular morning, 2 years ago, when Lily had come downstairs at 7 a.m. to find the house empty, and her mother already on a video conference with Singapore, and had sat at the kitchen table with her cereal going soggy, while Victoria's voice drifted down from the office in the measured, authoritative cadences of someone managing a different world. She had never told Victoria this. Margaret had told her, months later, gently, and Victoria had rearranged her morning call schedule, and had not allowed herself to think too carefully about what she had rearranged it from. You have a daughter who needed you close, Victoria said. And you were there. She said it as fact, without sentimentality. My daughter needed me close tonight. She said this one differently, and you were there instead. Daniel said nothing. That isn't, she said, carefully, a comfortable thing to sit with. No, he said, I imagine not. Outside the parlor windows, the estate's grounds were lit with the soft garden lighting that Victoria had chosen because it was beautiful, and not because she had ever spent an evening looking at it. The night was clear. Somewhere in the distance, the city made its low, continuous sound. How is Cora's condition now? Victoria asked. Managed. Medically stable for 18 months. He said it with the particular quality that parents of medically complex children develop, the careful, exact optimism that refuses to overclaim. She sees her nephrologist every 3 months. Her creatinine levels have been holding. The current trajectory is good. Victoria nodded. Then, and you? What's the trajectory for you? He looked at her. This time he really did smile, briefly, in the way of someone who was not expecting the question, but found it, on reflection, fair. "Forward," he said. "That's the plan." The hospital room at Georgetown was pale and quiet. The kind of pale that was the specific color of institutions, that meant well and tried hard, which Victoria had always found obscurely comforting in its straightforwardness. No pretension. Just function. Just care. Lily was awake in the bed. The hives faded to pink and then to nothing. The post-reaction fatigue softening her features into something younger than 9. She had the hospital's remote control in one hand and had been moving through the channels with the unhurried, exploratory quality of a child who had been frightened and had come through it and now found the world on the other side, unexpectedly interesting in its ordinariness. Victoria was in the chair beside the bed, which she had been in for 3 hours and would be in until morning. She had her phone off. This had not happened at a hospital visit in the 4 previous instances of Lily's allergic reactions, minor ones. Nothing like tonight. Her phone had always been on. There had always been something to manage. Tonight there was only this room and her daughter's face, and the pale, functional light. Lily turned off the television, which meant she wanted to talk. "The man who helped me," she said. The quiet one, Daniel. He knew exactly what was happening. She said it with a child's directness. The factual appreciation of someone who had not yet learned to dress observations in diplomatic language. "He wasn't scared. He's trained for situations like that," Victoria said carefully. "Were the other people trained?" "A bit. Dr. Stratton was." "He's a physician." Lily appeared to consider this with the equanimity of a child who has just processed a significant gap between credential and capability. "But Daniel knew," she said. "Yes, he has a daughter," Lily said. This was not a question. She had overheard, in the brief time between the ambulance's arrival and her departure, some portion of the conversation between her mother and Daniel. In the parlor doorway, she had not told her mother this, because she had the instincts of a child raised around people who guarded their conversations. "I heard him say something about his daughter. Her name is Cora." Lily absorbed this. "Is she okay?" "She is. She's been sick, but she's doing better. He gave up his real job to take care of her," Lily said. She said it with no particular drama, just the clear-eyed comprehension of a child who understood what sacrifice was because she had observed its absence. Victoria looked at her daughter's face and felt something happen in her chest that she had been carefully preventing for approximately 9 years, and that occurred anyway, the way certain structural failures do not suddenly, but as the completion of a process long underway. "He did," she said. "Are you going to help him?" Victoria was quiet. "I'm thinking about it." "You should," Lily said simply. She turned her head and looked at her mother with those gray eyes that saw too clearly and had always seen too clearly. The eyes that Victoria had told herself were her ex-husband's and had known, privately, were her own. "You're good at helping when you decide to actually do it." Victoria Hargrove, who had closed a $300 million acquisition at the age of 31, who had negotiated contracts in 3 languages and built an empire from the specific combination of intelligence and refusal that characterized everything she did, sat in a hospital chair and felt the peculiar, enormous weight of being known by her daughter. "I'm going to be better at deciding," she said. Lily reached out and took her mother's hand. Her grip was small but certain, the grip of someone who had just returned from somewhere and was making sure the person they came back to was still there. They sat together in the pale institutional light and did not speak for a long time. And this was without either of them saying so, without ceremony or announcement, the beginning of something different than what had come before. 3 weeks later, Daniel Croft was in the kitchen of the Tacoma Park apartment at 7:15 in the morning, making the particular version of scrambled eggs that Cora had approved no pepper, a specific amount of cheese, the eggs soft but not wet, which had taken 3 months of negotiation to define precisely enough that he could reproduce it reliably. Cora was at the table doing her homework, which she had not done the previous evening because they had spent the previous evening watching a documentary about deep-sea fish that she had pronounced the best documentary ever made, displacing the previous holder of that title, a documentary about manatees. "Dad," she said, without looking up from her worksheet. Yeah, if you had to choose between being a superhero with flight or a superhero with invisibility, which would you choose? He considered this seriously, as he always did when she raised philosophical propositions, because she was 7, and her philosophical propositions deserved the same rigor she gave to her homework. Flight, he said. You'd still know you were there, with invisibility. That seems lonelier. She considered this. Okay, she said. I'd choose invisibility. And then I'd sneak onto planes and go places. He laughed, a real one, the kind that surprised him, and turned back to the eggs. His phone was on the counter. He had seen the email from Victoria Hargrove's office the previous afternoon, and had read it twice, and then closed his phone, and not opened it again. Which was the version of thinking he did about important things. The email was professionally drafted, and carefully impersonal in the way that communications from powerful people were when they were trying not to sound like they were offering charity, because Victoria Hargrove had clearly understood that what she was offering would not be received as charity if it was not framed as one. The position was real. Director of Safety and Emergency Response, Hargrove Foundation, the nonprofit arm of Victoria's portfolio, which ran 4 children's health facilities in underserved communities in the district in Maryland. The job required exactly the certifications Daniel already held, plus the paramedic expertise that was currently going unused. It paid well. The hours were structured. There was a medical benefits package that included the pediatric nephrology coverage Cora's current plan managed barely adequately. At the bottom, in language that was clearly Victoria's own and not her assistant's, the email said, "This is not gratitude. Gratitude is insufficient currency for what you did. This is recognition that a person with your training and judgment belongs somewhere that uses it. Whether that somewhere is this or something else entirely is your decision. I do not need an answer until you have fully considered it." He had read that paragraph 4 times. He served the eggs. Cora examined them, took a bite, declared them acceptable with the gravity of a judge delivering a verdict, and went back to her worksheet. He sat across from her and drank his coffee, and thought about the shape of a life, how it could look, from certain angles, like loss, and from others like the architecture of everything that mattered. He thought about Lily Hargrove's voice, saying hi to him from the floor of the ballroom, that small, hoarse, returned word. He thought about Cora's hands on his arm, the night she had come to find him at 2 in the morning, because she had had a dream about something she couldn't describe, and he had sat with her until she slept again, and had not resented a single minute of it. He thought about Victoria Hargrove, sitting in a hospital chair in dark slacks and a cashmere sweater with her phone off, holding her daughter's hand. It is not gratitude, the email said. It is recognition. He thought about that for a while. Then he opened his phone. The Hargrove Foundation offices were in a converted townhouse in DuPont Circle. Nothing like the estate. Nothing like the ballroom with its Viennese chandeliers and its cold architectural light. The renovation had been done in a way that kept the building's bones and added the practical, durable furniture of a place that was actually used. Sturdy tables, good lighting, chairs built for long meetings rather than brief appearances. Daniel came for the interview on a Thursday morning and met with Victoria and 2 members of the foundation board and a program director named Charles, who was a former EMT and who spent the first 15 minutes of the meeting asking Daniel increasingly specific questions about pediatric emergency protocols until it became clear that Daniel's knowledge exceeded his own, at which point Charles leaned back and said, with the directness of a man who had always preferred clarity, "When can you start?" Victoria did not ask when he could start. She waited until after the board members and Charles had gone, when it was just the 2 of them in the conference room, with the windows that looked out over the townhouse's small courtyard garden bare now in February, but with the patient structural suggestion of what it would become in spring. "Cora," she said, "have you thought about what this would mean for her schedule? The hours work better than what I'm doing now," he said. "She's in school until 3:15. The benefit package covers her current treatment, plus some coverage we don't have access to right now." He paused. "I've thought about it." "I know you've thought about it," Victoria said. "I meant, has she thought about it?" He looked at her. "She's 7, Victoria said. "She understands more than 7-year-olds are given credit for." I know this because I spent 9 years failing to adequately account for it. She said the last sentence with a particular dryness that was not quite humor and not quite grief, but something compound, something that contained both. I'm asking whether she knows and whether she's comfortable. He was quiet for a moment. She knows I'm looking at a new job. She knows it's connected to the sick girl from the fancy party, which is how she refers to Lily. He paused. She asked me if Lily was okay. I told her yes. She said, "Tell her I hope she feels better." She does that, sends regards through me to people she hasn't met, like a small diplomatic ambassador. Victoria's expression shifted in that way that her expressions had shifted throughout the weeks since the party's small, infrequent openings, like light through briefly parted curtains. "Lily wants to meet her," she said. "I know," he said. She wrote her a note. Lily. I wasn't sure if she did, Victoria said. I have it. It's on Lily's desk. She's written a response that she's revised 4 times and hasn't sent yet because she wants it to be exactly right. He smiled. That's very Hargrove, Victoria said, without warmth or coldness, just recognition. I was going to say thorough. Yes, she said. That too. The garden outside the window had a stone bench that was currently dusted with the last of last week's snow, and Victoria looked at it for a moment with the expression of someone who was seeing something clearly that they had been looking at from the wrong angle for a long time. I spent 9 years building something I was proud of, she said. And I forgot to build in the part where she could see me building it. Where it wasn't just the results. The product, the thing that was supposed to explain everything. She was quiet. You built something smaller, more visible. She could see every piece of it. He did not immediately respond, because he understood that she was not asking him to. I don't know if I'm capable of the version of it you have, Victoria said. I don't think I was made for the same dimensions. She looked back at him. But I think I'm capable of more than the version I had before. That's enough, he said. That's actually enough. She looked at him steadily. Then she nodded. Once the same precise nod, he realized that she had given across the ballroom to Lily 3 weeks ago. I see you. I'm here. Daniel started the job on the 1st of March. On the 3rd of March, Cora met Lily Hargrove at the foundation offices, where Lily had come after school with Margaret. They spent 17 minutes in the small conference room, while Daniel and Victoria stood in the hallway outside the glass partition and did not speak. Lily gave Cora the 4th and final draft of her letter, which she had rewritten on cream-colored stationery in careful, deliberate cursive that she had practiced specifically for the occasion. Cora read it with the focused attention of someone taking a written document seriously, and then looked up and said something that made Lily laugh, a real laugh, startled and delighted, the laugh of a child who had been surprised into it, and then they were talking, their hands moving, and whatever the distance had been before it was already behind them, dissolving in the easy, practical magic that children sometimes perform in the first 5 minutes of a friendship that will last. Victoria watched her daughter laugh. Daniel watched his daughter lean forward over the table with the complete physical confidence of a child who had decided to be somewhere. Outside the conference room windows, DuPont Circle was moving through the particular density of early March. The city at its least theatrical gray, purposeful, neither summer's ease nor winter's drama, just the city going about its work in the ordinary light of a regular afternoon. She kept the letter, Daniel said. I know, Victoria said. 4 drafts. She writes everything 4 times, Victoria said. She doesn't show anyone the first 3. I read the first one once, by accident. It was better than the 4th. She paused. I didn't tell her that. Why not? Because she needed to believe the 4th one was right. And it was. Just differently. She looked at him sideways, with the dry, level attention that he had come to understand. Was her version of warmth not hidden? Exactly. Just structured differently than most people's. Like most things, he considered this. That's a reasonable philosophy. I have a reasonable philosophy, she said. I have several of them. I just don't always apply them in the right order. Inside the conference room, Cora said something else, and Lily pressed her hand over her mouth to contain a laugh that came out anyway. Cora looked pleased with herself, the particular, brief pleasure of a comedian who has found their audience. "Your daughter," Victoria said, "is funny." "She's been funny since she could talk," Daniel said. "I have no idea where she got it." "Probably you," Victoria said. "People who are quiet in groups are often very funny one-on-one. They've been saving it up." He looked at her. "Is that a character assessment?" "An observation," she said. "I'm professionally observant." "You are," he said. The afternoon light shifted as a cloud moved and then moved on, and the conference room brightened briefly and then settled, and the two children inside it did not notice, because they were deep in a conversation about something: fish, manatees, deep-sea documentaries, the specific ranking of animals by interestingness that neither of the adults outside could hear. 2 months later, on a Saturday in early May, Lily Hargrove found Daniel in the foundation offices. He had come in on a weekend to finish a safety protocol review for the Maryland facility, and she presented him with a drawing she had made. It was a careful drawing, done in colored pencils, of a large room with chandeliers and a lot of small figures. In the middle of the room, rendered in more detail than the others, was a man kneeling beside a smaller figure. The man had brown hair and was wearing a suit that was slightly too big across the shoulders. The smaller figure had yellow hair and a navy sash. At the bottom of the drawing, in Lily's deliberate, practiced cursive, she had written, "The hero was quiet, so nobody saw him coming. That is the best kind." Daniel looked at the drawing for a long time. "Can I keep this?" he said. "That's why I made it," Lily said, with the mild impatience of a child whose intentions had been misread. He put it in his desk drawer, where it would stay for years, alongside a photograph of Cora at 6 months old, and his expired flight paramedic certification, and a small stone Cora had given him once because she said it looked like a cloud, which it did not, but he had told her it did, and that had been the right answer. He worked until 4, then he drove home to Tacoma Park, and Cora was at the kitchen table with her homework, and her careless, concentrated presence that filled the apartment the way light fills a room, not by intention but by nature, just by being there. "How was it?" she asked, not looking up. "Good," he said. "Did you see Lily?" "Briefly. She gave me a drawing." "Of what?" He hung up his jacket. "Us," he said. "Sort of." Cora considered this. "Is it good?" "It's very good." She nodded, satisfied, and returned to her homework. He went to the kitchen and started on dinner. And the apartment was warm. And outside the window, the May evening was doing what May evenings do: softening the light, extending the day, making the ordinary world look briefly, precisely like enough. In the moment it matters. It is never rank or wealth or the scale of what you have built that crosses a room toward a frightened child. It is simply the person who knows what to do, and who has decided, long before the crisis arrives, what kind of person they will be when it does.